Hey guys, this is Mitch with Fine.CGI, and today we're going to talk about how to integrate SQLite into Godot. So we're going to first download our add-on, then we're going to talk about how to create tables, then we're going to talk about how to insert data, we're going to talk about how to select data, update data, and delete it. Then we're going to talk a little bit about custom queries, so you can go in and actually really control what your data is doing. So we'll talk a little bit about joining, we'll talk a little bit about things like that, and finally, we're going to talk about how to store images in your database and how to load it. It was a really big question about 2 years ago when I created this tutorial a long time ago for Godot 4.2, I think. So a lot has changed and a lot has gotten way easier. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first thing that we have to talk about is we have to talk about the plugin that we're going to be using. So SQLite, unfortunately, is not natively supported by Godot, but a contributor called Too Shady for You created this plugin called Godot SQLite. Now you can see he has this really cool graphic, and you can see the supported operating systems are macOS, Linux, Windows, Android, iOS, and HTML5, but only for Godot 3.3. So in this case, it's not supported in our case because we're using Godot 4. Typically, when you want to install this plugin, whenever I tell people how to install plugins, I usually say go to the release and then pull the latest release. But in this case, the plugin actually doesn't give you the proper files. So I'm not sure if there was something that was missed or if there's something that I'm missing. But if we go into the bin file here, which is where the binaries are located, you can see that they have the binaries here, but there is no plugin config or Godot SQLite GD extension file. So unfortunately, we can't just install it that way. So the question is, how can we install it? Well, all we have to do is we have to go into our project here. And what we can do is come into asset lib, come up here and type SQLite. You can see the Godot SQLite right here. So go ahead and click on that and we will click download. Now it's going to go ahead and download. It should take a few seconds and we will click install. Now that's going to uncompress the stuff and properly install it onto your system. And the best way to know if this works is to use the plugin. So once you have this, it should just work. So you can see if we come in here, you can see we have all the files as we'd expect, and we have the bin files as we'd expect as well. Now the best way to make sure that this works properly is by using it. So what we'll do is we'll come up, we'll click on user interface. We're going to right click our control node. We're going to attach a script and we'll call it SQL tutorial.gd. Now you can call this whatever you want. A lot of times I like to call it like SQL controller or something like that. It's completely up to you. So we're going to go ahead and hit OK or create, and then we're going to go ahead and create our database. So what we'll do is first we'll say var database : SQLite, like that. You can see as soon as you get that little green color right here, that means that this is installed correctly. So now we should just be able to create a database. So we can just come in here and say database is equal to SQLite dot new, like that. And I'm going to go ahead and hit Control S and save. And then I'm going to actually create my database. So I'll say database dot path is equal to res : data.db. And then we'll go ahead and open that database, database.opendb. And now if we hit play, in theory, but you'll see right here, open database successfully, see users, Fine.CGI, documents, SQLite tutorial, data.db. So what does that mean? Well, if we come over here, we right click on our RES, we go into open in file manager, you'll see that we have a data.db file right here. And this is a database file. So that means that everything's actually working correctly. So now the question you might be asking is, okay, that's cool. How do I actually create a table? How do I create data, right? How do I insert stuff? How do I select stuff, right? Well, thankfully, Too Shady for You is awesome and actually added a bunch of adapter functions that kind of does a lot of this work for you. So what we'll do is we'll come over here. We're going to create a couple of buttons. So we'll right click, attach a child node. We'll type button, and we'll just make it about this big, give or take. Now I'm going to name this insert data, and I'm going to come in here and type insert data. And I'll actually change this, get rid of that space, because you should never have a space in your node path because it makes things very difficult to work with. So now I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate it. I'll pull it down, I'll duplicate it, I'll pull it down, and I'll duplicate it one more time, and I'll pull it down. And I'll name this one select data. I'll grab this one and type update data. And then I will grab this one and type delete data. And I have to stop doing spaces because it's going to kill me. So hold on 1 second. And then I'm going to duplicate this one more time, drag it down, and then I'm going to do custom select like that. And then we need to put some kind of parameters so that way we can actually put in some data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, add another child node. I'm going to add in a label like so. And then I'm going to right click, add a child node, and I will put in a text edit like that. I'll grab my text edit. I'm going to pull it over here, make it about yay big, give or take. I'll grab my label, bring it over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to insert some personnel data. So we'll type name. We're going to duplicate that label, duplicate that text edit. We'll grab both of those guys, pull them down like so. We're going to change this one from name to score like that. And I'm going to go ahead and say name right here. And I'm going to grab score. Now, all this is going to do is it's going to allow us to insert, select, update, delete, and custom select our data. And we need to also create our table. So let's do that as well. So Control duplicate. And I probably should put it at the top because that makes sense. So I'm going to grab all of these guys, drag them down, change this one to create table like so. And we'll say create table like that. So once we have all of this, we should be ready to do all of our coding. So what I'm going to do is hook these guys up to my control node here so that we can actually fire off these functions. So we'll go node, button down, control node, create table, button down, control node, select, button down, control node. Do the same thing for this guy, button down, connect, delete data, connect, custom select, and connect. Now, when we want to create a table, so we'll go to create table right here. When we want to create a table, what we can do is we can basically create a dictionary that represents that table. And the data has to be in a format that is very specific. So I'll show you how it works. So first we'll say var table is equal to bracket bracket, and you need to come up with the column of the data. So we'll hit quote ID because every single database table should always have an ID. Then you need to create an object, and this object has to have some parameters in here. In general, overall, you're really only going to use one, which is data underscore type, but there is other data types that are available, and we're going to make that into an integer. Now we're also going to add primary key, and we'll make that a true. And we're going to make this not null like that. And with IDs, typically you want to auto increment. So we'll hit quote auto underscore increment. And we'll make that equal to true like that. Now, once you have this, now you can basically grab your other column. So in our case, we have a column that is for our name. So we'll type name, colon, bracket, bracket, quote, data underscore type, colon, it is text because it is a name. And then they have a score, colon, bracket, bracket, data underscore type, colon, and we'll make that into an integer because our scores cannot be floats in the case of this example. Now, once you have this, now you can create your table. And that's actually really easy to do. All you have to do is type database dot create table like that. And then you could just type quote players, comma, and then we could pass in that table dictionary that we built. Now, if we hit Control S, we can come into our project, hit refresh, click create table, and you'll see that we got no response. So how do we know if it worked? Well, what we can do is we can use a tool that's called DB Browser for SQLite. It's widely considered one of the most popular tools to basically ever exist when it comes to SQLite. So what you could do is come to this site. I have a link to it in my description below. So go ahead and click on that. Click on download, and then go ahead and download whichever installer you need. If you don't want to, just do a zip and then it doesn't actually install it onto your machine. In my case, I'm going to go ahead and install it. So I'm going to go out to my downloads. You'll see I have it right here. So I'm going to double click on that. I will click run, click next. I'll click accept the terms because it's fine if they steal my soul. Click next, and then we will click next, and I think we're good there. We'll just keep the defaults. Next, and install. Now it's going to go ahead and install it, and it should be pretty quick. All right, once you have this, go ahead and click finish. We're going to hit Windows SQL. If we type DB browser, you'll see that nothing seems to come up. So that kind of stumped me for a while. It looks like I have to go out to C program files, DB browser for SQLite. I don't know if they made a mistake or whatever with the way they set it up, but it's not showing up in my apps here as something that I can use. So I don't know if there's something that I was missing here. But here's where it is. So I'm going to right click this and I'm going to pin that to my start. So now it's going to show up inside my start, and then I'll click on Windows DB and now it comes up. So I don't know what was going on there, but I'll run that real quick. Now all we have to do is navigate out to our database. So we'll click open database. We're going to navigate to its location. In our case, it's going to be in documents, SQLite tutorial, data.db, and you will see that we have a players table right here. So great, our stuff is working. So now the question is, how do we insert data into our database? That's actually really easy. If you come up to insert right here, all we have to do is create some data and then insert it. Simple enough. So how do we do that? Well, first we need to get a dictionary. So we'll say var data is equal to bracket, bracket, and we'll say quote name colon $ name dot text. And then all we have to do is put in our other column. So in our case, if we look at our DB browser here, it's going to be score. So we'll say score. And then $score.text. Now, because we set score's data type as int, it has to be a type int for it to work. So we'll pass in a type int like that. Now, you might be wondering, why do I not have my ID right here? That's because I have auto increment on. So if we don't pass in our ID, then it just automatically, and actually I spelt auto wrong, so that might not work. Let me check my database real quick. Click on our players, modify table. So you can see here, AI is not checked. So I will check that because that would have completely broke the project. So good thing I saw that. So we'll click OK, and that will save it to our database. So now we're good to go. So because we have auto increment, what that's going to do is it's going to automatically increment our ID. And the reason why you want an ID is because you can use it for joining on your data. And I'll explain what that means in a little bit when we get to our custom selection statement. But to insert data, all we have to do is type database.insert row. And then we can pass in which table we want to insert into, which in our case is going to be players. And then we can pass in our dictionary of data. So we can just pass in data like that. And now if we hit refresh, we can type test, and test got a score of 10. And if we click insert data, you'll see if we open up DB browser for SQLite, we go to browse data, you can see test with a score of 10. So that's basically how we can insert data, which is awesome. So now the question is, how do we select data? So selecting data is super important because what's good as a database, right? Without being able to select. So to select data, all we have to do is come in here and type database.select rows. Now you'll see that we have some unnamed arguments here. So what we'll do is to set the table. So in our case, our table is players. comma, and then we get to kind of set our where clause. So for those of you that are familiar with where clauses, basically that's what this is for. For those of you that don't know what a where clause is, basically a where clause allows you to segment your data, allows you to pull back specific sets of data. So for instance, if I want anybody that has a score greater than 10, that's what I can do. So I can say, I want to get my players where their score is greater than 10. And then this last parameter is basically an array of strings, and it's basically, what do you want to select? In my case, I'm going to select everything. So we'll hit star like that. And that's going to pull back that data. So let's go ahead and print that data out. So we'll type print database select rows. Now, if we refresh this and we hit select data, you will notice that nothing came back. So why is that? Well, if we look at our score, we have a score of 10, and we're only selecting stuff that's above 10. So what happens if we insert a score? So let's say John, and we say John's pretty all right at the game. He got a 12, and we insert that data. You'll see if I refresh this table, we have John right here. If we select that data, you will see that John comes up because John has a score greater than 10. Now, what if I only want a specific column? What if I didn't want all of it, right? Because right now we're pulling back their ID, their name, and their score. Well, all we have to do is type name or score or whatever data we're trying to pull back. So if I do that and I refresh it and I hit select data, you will see we just get back name : John, and that's it. We only pull back the one data set that we actually need. So great, we're pulling back our data, we're doing our stuff as we expect, and everything seems to be working. And this also pulls back multiple sets of data. So if you were to do something like Laura, and you were to say that she got 22, and you insert the data, and then you select it, you'll see that we come back with John and Laura, because we are pulling back any score that's above 10, so it pulls back both of them, which is great. Next, we're going to go ahead and update our data. So you can select data, you can insert data, but sometimes you don't always want to just add additional stuff. What if somebody played the game again and they got a score of 30, right? What if John really grinded hard and got 30, right? You wouldn't want to just insert another score where John got 30, right? You may just want to update his score. So how do you actually do that? Well, updating is actually really simple. Thankfully, like I said, the Too Shady For You did really, really well with creating this add-on. So all you have to do is type database dot update rows, and then you choose your data, your table. So we'll say players, comma, then you get to choose what your condition is. So when you update data, if you don't have a condition, then it will update everybody. So that's something to keep in mind. So what we'll do is say name is equal to single tick parentheses, the single quote. I can't think of the name of it, but we'll do a single quote right there, plus $name.text plus quote, single tick quote like that, comma, and then you have to choose your data. So in my case, it's going to be $, score.text, and we'll wrap that into an integer like so. And that's going to go ahead and update that data. Now it is mad. Argument 3 should be a dictionary. So this actually needs to be a dictionary of data. So what we'll do is we'll say bracket quote score quote space score bracket. So basically you can update multiples of data in here just by doing it as a dictionary. Now I'll show you what that means. So we'll hit refresh. And if we select our data, you'll see that John has a score of 12. If I change it to John and we change it to 18 and we click update data, now if we reselect our data, you'll see that John has a score of 18. So that's really cool. But what if John changed his name to Mark? Well, all we have to do is hit comma, quote, name, Mark. And now all we have to do is hit refresh, come up here, type John, a score of 30, and then update data, and then select data. And you'll notice that now there is no more John, there is just Mark. John has been updated to be named Mark, and his score has been 30. So that's how you can do multiple columns with a single call, which is really useful. So now the question is, what if Mark decided to stop playing the game? What if he didn't want to play the game anymore? That's where deleting comes in. And all you have to do is say database.delete rows. You pass in the table that you're removing. Then you need to pass in the argument of what you're deleting. So basically, this is where your where statement will come in. So we'll hit quote, name is equal to tick space plus $name dot text plus quote tick like that. We'll refresh. We'll come up here. We'll type Mark. And we'll click delete data. And now if we select the data, you'll notice that Mark has been removed from the database. And if you look, if I refresh this, you'll see that only Test and Laura exist now. Mark has been removed from the database, that he no longer exists. And that's basically how that works. Now you might be asking, okay, so I can select, I can insert, I can go ahead and delete my data. How do I do more complicated queries? Because sometimes you want to do really complicated queries. Well, that's where the custom select type functionality comes from. They actually have, it's called a query in here. So you can do a custom query. So let's use this as kind of a way to kind of dovetail into joining data. So let's go to database structure. Let's create a table and let's call it player info. Let's go ahead and add in an ID. Let's make it an integer, not null, private key, and auto increment. Let's add in another one and let's say address like that. And then we're going to make this into a text. We're going to go ahead and click OK. So now we have player info and players. So if I go into browse data and I click on player info, you'll see that there's no information, but I can add it. So I'm going to hit a plus button and I'm going to go ahead and make the address test address like that. I'm going to go back to my players and I'm going to link this data with our player info table. So if we go to our database structure, we go to our players, modify the table, and go ahead and add in a player info ID and hit OK, that's going to add in that row column into our. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into player info. You can see here it has an ID of 1. So I'm going to go into players and I'm going to say Laura has a player info ID of 1. And I'm going to say that test has a player ID info level ID of 2. I'm going to go into player info. I'm going to add one more and I'm just going to say 7 John Street, right? If I come into execute SQL and I type select star from players, I can actually hit this and I can run, right? And what it's going to do is it's going to select our data from our database, right? So this is exactly like doing this right here, except for without the score is greater than 10. So what if I needed to do where my score is greater than 10? Well, all I have to do is type where score is greater than 10. And if I hit play, you'll see that all that comes back is Laura. So that's really cool. But what if I wanted to know where Laura lives, right? I have her address right here underneath my player info table, but I don't have it in my players table, right? Well, I kind of do. I actually have it in my player info ID. So what I can do is what's called joining. I can join these two tables together. So we'll type join player info on player info.id is equal to players.player info ID. And if I run this, you'll see that now it's coming back with her address. Now you might be wondering, okay, but why wouldn't I just place my data in? Why wouldn't I just place their information here, right? Instead of putting it in a separate table. So here's why. Let's say I have a lot of duplicated data. Let's say I have 5 people that live at test address. Instead of me inserting it into players 5 separate times for those 5 people, I can insert it one time and then create this little link between the two. And the reason why that's important is because it allows your database to become more efficient and a lot smaller. A lot of times at work, what we do is we create these huge database structures to store all sorts of data, and we need to store it in an efficient way so that way we can actually select our data in a really simple manner. So that's what all of this is about. It's called data normalization. If you guys want a tutorial on data normalization and let's get really into databases, I'm more than happy to create one because databases is one of my fun side things that I do at work all the time. So I love to work on databases. So let me know if you want a really crazy database tutorial in the comments below, and I'll be more than happy to build it. But just know that that's how you join tables together. So now the question is, how do we do this, but inside of Godot? Well, that's where query comes in. So all we have to do is type database.query, and we can pass in our query. And in our case, I'm just going to pass in this query right here. Select star from players, join player info.id is equal to player info ID where score is greater than 10. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go like this plus $score dot text, and that should just work. So now all I have to do is pull back that data. So what I'm going to do is say for I in database.query result print my data. So we'll say I like that. And this is not a function, it's actually a data. So we'll do that. And I'm going to run this, and it's only going to print out 1. So we're going to have to do a little bit of finagling to get it so that it does what we need. But we'll refresh, and you'll see that if I do custom select, well, we get a SQL error. So good news, something broke. So now we get to take a look at it. So you can see that we're selecting star from players, join player info on playerinfo.id equal to player info ID, where score is less than our score text. Now, the reason why that happened was because we never put in a score value here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 10, and I will click custom select, and nothing happened. So the question is, does Laura have a score bigger than 10? She does. So that should just work. The question is, why didn't it work? We drop a breakpoint here. We hit custom select. Let's see what our query result is. It's empty because it didn't stop at all for this. So something's wrong. So let's take a look at our database. And I made one of the biggest mistakes that most people that are new with SQLite make. So you can see here, everything seems to be fine. Our data structure is all set up. But when we run it through Godot, it doesn't work. But you'll notice that there's a write changes button. This happens whenever you do stuff inside of SQL browser here. It basically caches all of that information. And then once you click write changes, then it writes it to the database. So now in theory, this should just work. So we'll hit refresh, score of 10. Custom select, and you will see that it came back with the data as expected with that test address. If we set it to something like 1, you'll see it comes back with test and its address and Laura and her address as well. So that's something to keep in mind, is basically make sure you write your changes, because if you don't, things can break. So just make sure that you do that. So awesome. Now, if the only thing you wanted to know was about how to set up SQLite in the basic input outputs, then you're good. We're basically done and you guys can move on. But one of the biggest common questions I've received before with my other previous tutorial was, how do I store player images in a database? And that's actually relatively easy. If we go ahead and duplicate our custom select button and we pull this guy down, we come over here and we say, store player image, like that. We change this to store image. If we come in here, disconnect this and connect it, and then connect, we can do what's called using a blob file to store our data. Blobs are super great. Basically, a blob is just whatever you want it to be. It's just that. It's basically anything. And I typically tell people don't use blobs unless it's for images or like really non-formed data. So let's find an image real quick to store. So the image that we're going to store is a picture of the bestest boy in the world, Mochi, my bird. So what we'll do is we'll drag this guy in here into Godot to get imported. And what we'll do is we'll store that data. So I'm going to go ahead and change the database structure a tiny bit. I'm going to right click my players and I'm going to modify the table. I'm going to add in another row and I'm going to make it into a picture row like that. I'm going to make it a type blob and I will hit OK. Now that's going to add in a picture parameter right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to store this photo inside of my database. So now we'll load that image. So we'll say var image is equal to equals preload my image. And then we need to convert it to a packed byte array. So we'll say var pba is equal to image.getImage dot save JPEG to buffer, and that's going to actually save it as a JPEG image as a packed byte array. And the reason why we want to use a packed byte array is because you can't just drop picture data into the database. It needs to be saved as something. So we'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll say database dot, and I'm just going to update a row because we already have some data in here. So we'll say update rows, quote players, comma, where our name is equal to, and in our case, I'm going to pick Laura because that's a great name. So we'll pick Laura, comma, and then our dictionary of data. So we'll say bracket, bracket, quote, and in our case, we're going to use picture, and then we'll pass in our PBA right into it like that. Now, in theory, this should just work. So we should be able to hit refresh, store player image, no such column Laura. Now that definitely should have worked, but now I'm lost. So let me see. Laura, name is equal to Laura. That's correct. Name is equal to Laura. Name is equal to name.text, score, name mark. So did I make a mistake? Oh, I see what I missed. So I'm missing parentheses around my name Laura. So there we go. We'll hit refresh. Let's try that again. Store player image. You'll see that we didn't get any errors. So we'll click on here. We'll click refresh and you'll see that we have a blob that has the picture of my boy Mochi right here. And now we can basically load that data. So we'll come in here, we'll duplicate our player image. We'll say load player image. We'll change this to load image. We'll click node, right click, disconnect, right click, connect. We'll connect it to here. And then what I'm going to do is add in a texture rect like that. And I'm going to drag this guy over here like so. Make it about yay big. It'll probably stretch it really bad and it'll probably look bad, but that's okay. This is just to show an example. Now I'm going to make sure I fit width because that probably will fix the issue, but we'll see. So now we'll come in here. We'll need to select that data. So we'll say database dot select rows, quote players, comma, quote name is equal to parentheses, Laura, parentheses, comma, and we can pass in an array of parameters. Now, in my case, I'm going to just grab it all. I'll just grab the entire data set. And now I can just say for I in database dot query result. And then from here, I can do whatever I want with the data. So I'm going to take it and say var image is equal to image dot new bracket bracket enter. And then we'll go ahead and load our image. So we'll say image dot load JPEG from buffer. We'll pass an I dot picture like that. And then we'll just convert it to a texture. So we'll say var texture is equal to image texture dot create from image. And then we'll pass in our image. And then finally, we can basically just say $, texture rect dot texture is equal to texture. There we go. So basically we're looping through our query results, which should only be one. Then we're making a new image. We're basically loading it. So we're taking that data that's a byte array, that byte buffer. We're going to load it into an image, right? And make it into an image. And then we're going to create a texture out of it and then assign that texture to our texture. And now, in theory, providing we did everything correctly, we can hit refresh, hit load player image, and there's Mochi. He's looking a little on the fat side, but it worked pretty well. I should probably change this to fit height, and there we go. He's looking a little better. So that's basically how you can get SQL to work with your project inside of Godot 4.2. So if you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. Hey, if you dislike this video, go ahead and hit that dislike button because I'm here to make content for you guys. This video was a viewer suggested video, so if you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below or jump on my GitHub. A link is in the description and you can put a suggestion in my suggestion slot and I'll be more than happy to take a look at it and triage it with the rest of my tickets that are in there. And hey, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below or jump on my Discord. The link is in the description and anybody there will be more than happy to help you out with any issues you might have. We have a really great group of guys over there. But that is all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks.